Hi, I'm Michael Azarad, Editor-in-Chief of the Talkhouse, and welcome to the Talkhouse Music Podcast. J.G. Thirlwell began making the proverbial extreme noise terror in the early 80s as Scraping Foetus Off the Wheel, You've Got Foetus on Your Breath, Foetus Under Glass, and so on. Foetus made well over a dozen albums, each with one-word titles like Ache, Nail, Limb, and Vein. This was music that was wildly ahead of its time, and was a major influence on many bands, very much including Nine Inch Nails and Ministry. Then Thirlwell began to widen his palette dramatically, composing themes for imaginary films with Steroid Maximus, and releasing 1995's Gash, an incredible record, ambitious in the best way, that somehow managed to be released by a major label. He's since become an acclaimed new music composer, writing for groups like Bang on a Can and the Kronos Quartet, and he continues to work in rock music, collaborating with a wide range of musicians from the Melvins to Zola Jesus to Sonic Youth. And he does the score for the Venture Brothers cartoon series on Adult Swim, as well as composing film scores and designing complex sound installations. Oh yeah, he was also once in a band with Nick Cave, Mark Almond, and Lydia Lunch, for 3 days. Kronos Quartet founder and first violinist David Harrington once said, "I've always wanted the string quartet to be vital and energetic and alive and cool, and not afraid to kick ass and be absolutely beautiful and ugly if it has to be." He got what he wanted. One could argue that the widely acclaimed, chart-topping, prize-winning, multiple Grammy-winning Kronos Quartet is the most famous string quartet in the entire history of string quartets. Over their 42-year existence, they've exposed many different kinds of audiences to many kinds of music, by breaking down, or at least ignoring, barriers between genres. They've played art tango with Astor Piazzolla, an entire album of pieces by leading African composers, an entire album of Bollywood music. They played live with Tom Waits, David Bowie, Paul McCartney, and Bjork, and covered Bob Dylan, Ornette Coleman, and Sigur Rós. For many years, one of their favorite encores was Jimi Hendrix's Purple Haze, which you're listening to right now. Kronos is largely devoted to contemporary repertoire. They've worked closely with iconic composers such as Steve Reich, Arvo Pärt, Terry Riley, Philip Glass, Laurie Anderson, Henryk Gorecki, and Osvaldo Golijov. And lately, they've also begun collaborating with and commissioning pieces by a wide variety of younger musicians: Bryce Dessner from The National, Greg Saunier from Deerhoof, Amon Tobin, Glenn Kotche from Wilco, and Richard Reed Parry from Arcade Fire, among many others. And with their Under 30 project, they also commissioned pieces by composers under the age of 30. And they've commissioned and performed 2 pieces by J.G. Thirlwell, Eremikophobia and Nomatophobos, with a 3rd piece on the way. So we thought we'd put Thirlwell together with Harrington and see what these 2 brilliant and visionary musicians had to say to each other. So here's J.G. Thirlwell and David Harrington in conversation for the Talkhouse Music Podcast.
One of the first things I wanted to talk about was epiphanies, musical epiphanies. And, I've had a few in my life which have been sort of, eureka moments or just moments of revelation where I'm hearing music that I always wanted to hear, but I didn't know how to articulate it in my head, And I wanted to ask you about your epiphanies, because I think, the things that brought Kronos together and things that excite you,
Well, one of the things that got me, in fact, the thing that got me started playing string quartet music when I was 12 was joining the Columbia Record Club, which in those days you could do if you sent in a penny.
Yeah.
And then you got totally addicted, right?
12 albums for a penny.
Yeah, 12 albums for a penny. And then your parents ended up owing all kinds of money for years after that. And on the first offering, it just happened that at that time I was reading a biography of Beethoven. Mm-hmm. And I was right at that point about the late quartets. Mm. And so one of the first things I noticed in the Columbia Record Clubs was that the Budapest Quartet had just recorded a new set of the late quartets. And so I got one of them. Mm-hmm. And so happened it was Opus 127. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you know that piece, but it's the first of the late quartets. Mm-hmm. And it opens with this unbelievable E-flat major chord. Mm. It's just so great. And I put that on as a 12-year-old, and I had to make that sound. I had to find a way to do that. And within a week or so, I was, at the public library, and I checked out the music, the score and the parts, and called up some friends, and we sat in a practice room at the University of Washington. And I'll never forget, I gave the downbeat, and for about half a second, it sounded like the record. And that's all you need. That's all I needed. And after that, it was a disaster. It was turns out it's a very hard piece to play ultimately and all that. But that first chord just sounded great.
Yeah.
And I wanted to do that.
Yeah. And
there have been a lot of other things like that in my life where, somebody makes a sound on an instrument, or, they do something with their voice, or somebody has an idea that it just seems so amazingly wonderful that it just has to be explored.
Yeah.
And for me, it's really simple. I follow my ears, and I don't pretend to know anything about music, really, how it works. I don't know how it works. It's a mysterious kind of thing. But you just hear something that you fall in love with, and you just want to be with it more. You want to follow it to the ends of the earth. You want to try to recreate it. It's
say, how the hell did they do that?
How the hell is it done?
Yeah.
How does that work for you?
Same with me. I'll hear things and I'll go, how the hell did they do that? I'll hear a piece by someone and I'm like, how the hell did they score that? How the hell was what was going through their mind? What's on the page to make that happen? Like when I think one of mine was when I first heard Penderecki, and
which piece?
Clusters, or like the Threnody.
Threnody, yeah.
And then I saw him conduct that, and that was then when I see someone something performed or conducted, then that's a second revelation. It sort of unpeels the process, and that makes me want to go, okay, I'd like to explore that myself. How the hell do you do that? Or what would the J.G. Thirlwell version of that be? Or, for me, I've had a few revelations which have been sort of put me on left turns and right turns, throughout my life. But one of the first ones that I remember that I can kind of articulate was hearing this radio special when I was about 15, and it was The Residents, and it was about 1975 or something like that, and I guess they'd put out some records, but they were pretty off the radar, and this was, not only did it played a bunch of their music, but it perpetuated their mythology, and which was very mysterious and very opaque. But then when the sort of dissonance that they used in these, it was very otherworldly. And when I heard it,
which album was it? Do you remember?
Well, it was a radio special.
Oh, okay.
So it was drawn from a lot of their albums, I think.
Okay.
But it was probably Third Reich and Roll had been out, and Meet the Residents had been out by that time. It was maybe, I think Fingerprints was probably the current album at that time. And then I heard that, and then that was, like I said, it was like hearing the music that you always wanted to hear, but you didn't know that you hadn't heard it yet.
Yeah. Several years ago, I came across this recording that was made in, I think it was 1916, here in New York. And it was recorded by a singer named Zabela Panosian. Mm-hmm. And it's an Armenian song called Grung, Groung. And Zabela Panosian sings this one high note that just totals me out every time I hear it. It's just like, how does a human being find that kind of expression, I have to try to do that with a bow. And so we got an arrangement of that piece made by our friend Mary Kuyumjin. And that's the way it happens for me. Every once in a while, somebody will make a note. And I remember the first time I heard Jimi Hendrix play the Star Spangled Banner, you know, the Woodstock performance of that. And I just thought, that is the most amazing sound. Someday I've got to I have to learn how to do that. And then a few years later, I heard Black Angels by George Crumb. And within that piece, I heard some things kind of like what I remembered from hearing Hendrix. And so in 1973, when I first heard Black Angels on the radio, all of a sudden my world kind of, for a little moment, it made sense. You know, it was pretty weird, a weird time, and to be a young American person wanting to do music, it was very confusing. Like what do you do? You know, I'd grown up playing Haydn and Mozart and Schubert and Beethoven, and then when I was 16, I started playing new pieces and stuff. And as time was going on, I was getting more and more into the most recent stuff. That's what I wanted to hear and do. But then hearing Black Angels, there were some unbelievable moments and notes in that piece, and I had to get a group together to do that. And so really, hearing that performance, and it was the New York String Quartet, just released on CRI. They just released that Black Angels. I later met the disc jockey that played that on the radio station. That was pretty cool.
Do you know what you started?
Yeah. That was, and you know, that's one of the great things about radio and making recordings, isn't it? I mean, you just never know when somebody's going to come in contact with something.
Yeah.
And it's kind of nice to have those little things out there that people can access
randomly,
and sometimes, you know, sometimes there are moments in life when you really need a certain sound or a certain piece. You remember something that you've heard and you want to hear it again for whatever reason. I've always wanted to try to make those kind of things.
Yeah, I think my mind is full of those things. You know, that I'm grasping at. You know, when I started making records.
When was that? Anyway?
It was I think I was in a group that made the first album in 1980, and I made the first Foetus record in 1980. It came out in 81. But one of the motivations that I felt back then was making the music that I always wanted to hear, you know, which was kind of, there was a lot of different things happening at the same time, you know, in what I wanted to create. But it took me years of trying to do that. And because I was bold enough to go ahead and do it, but I didn't necessarily know what I was doing. I mean, and there was a kind of sometimes a bit of a short circuit between what I heard in my head and what ended up on magnetic tape. But there was a matter of steering what emerged out of the creative process, which might have changed what I'd heard in my head, and maybe it was better, maybe it was worse, maybe it was different, you know. And following that path, especially because I was just I was one person in the studio. I wasn't working with a band or working with an ensemble. So hearing the parts isolated would suggest other things, and the recording techniques really informed that, and it's always informed what I've done. The technology's kind of informed what I've done. But now, you know, a very exciting form of technology to me is creating scores, and I see that as a technology.
Yeah.
But having gone through, you know, starting with, you know, having a couple of little cassette players and bouncing sounds back and forth to 8-track recording studios, then the advent of MIDI, and then the advent of sampling and the accessibility of computers, and going through all of that technology to then reach creating scores and rescoring my work, and then writing for you and writing for, you know, other musicians. That to me is the most exciting thing, where I can have a page and give it to someone who interprets, and hearing, you know, that blossoming off the page, it's really exciting to me.
It's a marvelous process. Whoever came up with the idea of musical notation, well, it certainly did me a big favor.
Right.
You know, what I love about it is that it allows access to so many different things that there's no way you could have done it. There's no way I could have possibly played all the different sorts of music that I've been able to play without notation. Just couldn't have done it, I don't think. It's also, you know, the more I do it, the more I realize how important it is to get away from the notation, and to internalize. You know, it's like what you said about interpreting. The greatest moments that I've ever had of interpretation are when you're actually dealing with the music you're hearing inside, and you might be seeing it, but that's a superfluous to actually molding, shaping it, and, you know.
So how important is improvising for you? I mean,
well, to me, the best performances that Kronos have ever done are like improvisations. But I mean, we might be working from a notated score, but the second by second shaping of the music is happening, you know,
as you listen to each other.
Absolutely, and you know, playing off of what, you know, somebody does something. Wow, that was cool. Now can I contribute to that?
We were talking about, you know, radio as a way of introducing works, and how it introduced, you know, me to the Residents, you to George Crumb, and you know, you seem to be very hungry for hearing new composers and new works, and, you know, discovering people and stuff. So with new media, the internet, and there's so much stuff out there, and I'm curious to, I know that you're really into digging deep and finding new people and stuff. So what sort of avenues do you go down to find people these days?
Well, you know, one of the problems with being a musician, I'm sure you'll agree, is it happens in real time, and there's not very much of that. And from all the evidence I can gather, there's increasingly less of that.
Yeah.
You know, and so
especially as we get older.
That's it. You know, and having I mean, I try to keep my ears open for those things that have touched people that I know and whose opinions I value. And then, someone speaks really enthusiastically about something, or somebody really hates something, then I've got to check it out.
Yeah.
I've learned that kind of passionate listening is something to trust. Either way, it doesn't have to. You don't have to love it. In fact, I was talking to somebody yesterday on the plane about a mutual friend, and I don't know if you ever heard of Margaret Lyon, but Margaret Lyon was the chairman of the music department at Mills College. She brought Terry Riley and Pandit Pranath and Barrio and Mio and she ended up bringing Kronos there too. And she created this community, and apparently there were, some of the major composers and musicians that were there. She just couldn't stand their music, but she knew that it was something that had to be heard and should be done. And I loved Margaret. I thought she was just one of the great spirits of ever that I've known. And finally heard yesterday that, she didn't really always like everything, but she championed everything. And the idea of creativity. And for me, that's kind of what I want a concert to be. I want a concert to be a place where people think about things and think about life and the fragility of, this place that we get to share for a little while. And music is such a incredible kind of doorway into so many feelings and sounds and colors and cultures, and I like those concerts, and I want to try to make those kinds of concerts that where you just feel like you're more in awe of the possibilities for the next piece and the next step and tomorrow than you've ever been before.
Yeah, I feel that to me is the ultimate experience that you can have with a concert and with music, because I feel it's sacred, and that's coming from an atheist, but that's a sacred time, and it's a time that can be cherished, and it's that time that you can turn everything else off and lose yourself in that experience.
Yeah. I mean, I think the, one thing I've noticed, when I started Kronos, I used to write letters and take them to the post office to, I'd be writing letters to composers all over the world. And I might not hear from them for 2 months, And just this morning, I was in touch with this amazing musician who lives in France, practically in real time on email. And I was just thinking, it's really an amazing thing.
Yeah.
And we almost kind of take it for granted now. And so I think one thing that I'm trying to guard against is that kind of listening where you only tune in for a split second and then you tune out and you're on to something else. One thing I try to do every day is be sure there's like a dedicated hour or two where I just won't let myself get interrupted in my listening. I find it's harder to do than I thought.
Yeah,
actually.
Well, it's hard to get people to engage, now, and have people turn off their cell phones.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and that's one of the great things about a concert or a show is you tend to do that.
You still see people sneaking peeks.
Well, yeah, of course. But that kind of communal experience that in a concert is, at least it allows that kind of that way of approaching an experience that has a breadth of time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in a certain way, I think concerts are becoming more and more important.
Yeah.
That way. They kind of take us away from YouTube and all that, and yet I love YouTube. I mean, I can, somebody will mention somebody to me, I can go back to my hotel room and hear music immediately. Yeah. It's just cool.
Because I think you mentioned once before that you discovered someone on YouTube, and then I was wondering, whether you go down these YouTube wormholes for 3 hours and sort of end up going off in different directions.
And then I'll have no idea how I got there and where I'm at.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
That happened with this really great group from Palestine called Ramallah Underground. I cannot tell you how I found out about them, but it had something to do with YouTube and the internet and all that, and I ended up, and fortunately I was able to find out how to reach them, and that was cool. But I suppose I could, if I check the history on my computer, I might be able to figure it out, but I don't know. Sometimes it perplexes me why our culture doesn't value musicians more. I mean, not that, I don't need Donald Trump type wealth or anything like that, but I just sometimes feel the society just kind of takes us for granted, And one of the I've decided that one of the things, the real reasons, is because they call it playing music, and that play isn't valued enough.
Yeah,
certainly not. I mean, my daughter's a first grade teacher, and she's someone that values play, values what you learn from play in a group setting, and in Kronos, when our music is the most alive is when we're playing with it. But it's not, you know how hard every musician that works.
Oh yeah, it's ridiculous.
There's no such thing as a lazy musician.
No, there's no days off. There's no time off.
No.
And
as a musician, who would want one? I mean, what else is there to do that's better than music?
Yeah. Unfortunately, there's a lot of administration that goes hand in hand with that, and that can really eat up your time. And I have to make sure that every day there's time set aside to be creative. I have to do something creative every day, because that's where I get my juice, and that's how I move forward. And
do you work early in the morning?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I get up. I go to sleep late, and I get up early.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I do.
My secret is naps.
Oh, naps are great.
Yeah, it's my secret weapon.
Yeah, the 10-minute nap. Where you get totally, you have no idea what day it is or what hour of the day.
It's like you can reset the day.
I know, it's really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, Thomas Edison, I remember when I was a kid, I read about Thomas Edison and his naps. Yeah.
I'm trying to perfect the 1 second nap.
Oh, the 1 second nap.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
It consists of blinking, and when you blink, you go deep into a dream state, and then you wake up. And it's happened to me. But it happens during times of extreme exhaustion.
Yeah.
It's not so much refreshing as it is jarring.
For me, I make sure every day that I've heard music I've never heard before. Absolutely. That's just a requirement.
Oh wow, that's really amazing. Do you have a list of things like on the sideline that you've got to get to? And
you don't want to see what my music room looks like. It's embarrassing to take anybody in there. Yeah. It's kind of off limits.
Yeah.
It's so messy.
Yeah.
And it's messy, and yet everything has its kind of place.
Yeah.
And there's piles of things that need attention and
yeah,
listening.
I'm the same. I have a big bout of shelf building ahead of me before the end of the year to get everything off the floor. But I'm the same.
Personal craftsman to come in and help with the shelf.
No, I've perfected it myself.
Oh, you do it yourself?
I have my own methods, yeah. But yeah, I'm when it comes to music, I've likened myself to a whale that eats plankton,
krill or whatever.
Yeah, I'm sort of devouring this stuff, and then something filters out the other end. Subconsciously, things go in there, I guess, and
it's really amazing, like what sticks in music, and I believe it's moments. I mean, I don't think there's any piece that I know of, like any of the quartets that I've played, that in my mind I could go all the way through and sing it or even imagine it all the way through, but I can remember amazing moments.
Yeah.
And I guess for me that's what listening. I look for those magnetic points, and they kind of keep it all together, I think, for me. You've been to Amoeba over on Haight Street in San Francisco? Yeah. I mean, for me, a trip there usually takes 3 or 4 hours.
Yeah.
Because basically, I don't really believe in the categories. And it's kind of like, walking down the street and, you see things in the little cracks in the sidewalk. That's where the life is. The new plants are growing there. There might be a little tree or some grass, or, there might be a bug or something. That's where the action is. And so they've got these neat categories of things. And, I mean, it's a good way, to organize. But I mean, for me, it's just as important to go to the opera section as it is the hip hop or the avant-garde or the country western or whatever. I mean, I kind of want to check it all out if I can.
Yeah, I mean, for me, categories have been something of a yoke around my neck, for a long time, and I don't consider what I do to be in any one category, and I've covered broad spectrums of work, but I mean, I think that certainly if journalists are writing about you, they want to be able to sum you up in a sound bite, and then if someone wants to put you on their iTunes playlist, they have to put something down the bottom there, and
do you think that those categories are actually getting kind of more structured and stiff and kind of
I don't know,
less flexible than?
I think it really depends on the the genre, and I think that there's a lot of laziness that's attached to creating these categories, and I mean, there's this vague nebulous term, new music, and I don't know what you think about that, but I think it's probably less offensive than some things, but it doesn't really mean anything. I think maybe there's like composition-based music or whatever, but then there's if you look at, say, electronic music, there are there's a lot of really specific micro-genres in that, which come and go, you know, and there's people that work within those parameters, and people know what they're going to expect from that, and some people, you know, stick within that, and other people branch away from it. And then there's even record labels in electronic music which cater to one sound, you know, right. And the artists on that label, you kind of know that you're going to get a certain type of sound if you get something that's on that label. And
right, yeah.
So that seems to be a kind of a more recent type of development. But, you know, and then there's people that, I mean, like you worked with Amon Tobin, you know, right. And he sort of started off, I guess, in the world of drum and bass. And
yeah.
But what he ended up doing is, again, it's beyond categorization. I mean, I would characterize his work as maybe like sample-based, or, you know, starting as the core of what he did. But
that's one of the things that attracted me to his work initially, was the way he used bowed string sounds. Mm-hmm. I just thought was beautiful.
Yeah.
It's just amazing.
Yeah.
And he was able to do it live, too, not only on the recordings. I checked out a couple of his shows in San Francisco, and I heard the same thing. And I thought, wow, you know, the way he's listening is really interesting to me.
Yeah, he's incredible. And he's an artist who, I've listened to his work, and I've gone, I don't know what the hell he's doing. I don't know how he's doing it. He's creating some kind of a texture with a combination of sounds and repitching things and melding things. He's a real master at what he does.
Yeah. What are you hearing these days that I should know about?
What am I hearing these days? Last night I went and saw a really interesting guy who has an ensemble, and it's called the Ashcan Orchestra. You ever heard of that?
I have heard of them, but
let's
see.
And that was
where are they from?
Bushwick. This show was in Bushwick at the guy's place, and I can't remember his name right now, but he did... He makes compositions with I don't know how he programs these things, but he's programming struck bells, which are then interfaced with a light grid, which is on a panel with a lot of light bulbs on it. And then he had 4 other musicians, and first they were working up from scores, and they had small mallets, and they were hitting this sort of sculptural structure that was in the center of them, which was made of circular saw blades that were kind of riveted together, and it was very resonant, and I think it was also mic'd up because there was something humming through the ceiling, through the floor, and then they did a couple of pieces with musical bells, which was accompanied by this programmed other sort of bell device. And then they did a piece using electrical light bulbs, which had the proximity to this object and it was like 2 oscillators. Oh, wow. And as the light bulbs moved around, it changed the oscillation. So that was that's something I saw last night, and that was exciting to me. I've seen him do something before. He had an opera at Issue Project Room.
Okay.
And so that's the thing that's most fresh in my mind.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. I love it when a concert just kind of, first of all, there's something that just stays there in memory, and then becomes this source of direction or kind of leads one on to the next thing. You know, it's like, you know, music is kind of like this plant that's just kind of growing in so many directions all at the same time. And then and we you know, only think about the leaves and all that, but then there's also the roots, and they're growing as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, what have you heard lately that's excited you? A new regimen.
You know, there's this. My problem is I have trouble remembering the names. There's this trio from Korea that I heard I thought was really great. And they play traditional instrument. One or two of them play traditional instruments, and I think another plays a guitar or something. And it's really, really cool.
1940. 1940. 1940. On my birthday.
One of the great things about having done something for as long as I've done Kronos is, you know, you can, I mean, there's a lot to choose from now. Like, so a lot of the groups that play for us are playing things that we might have done 30 years ago or 20 years ago, something like this, some of our material. And to hear it interpreted by another generation of players who have grown up hearing entirely different things than I grew up hearing, and so just the sound and the feel and all that is just different, and yet it's wonderful.
Do you think the type of players that are coming out of conservatories now are different, informed differently than they were, say, 25 years ago?
Unquestionably.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing, really, what's available to us as musicians today. You think about it, and so the people that are forming their groups and are playing music are just able to hear things and be in contact with music in lots of exciting ways.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, you know, whoever tries to play an instrument or sing or do anything in music, you know, is trying to learn to make the best notes they can. You know, and that's why musicians, as you know, it's why we work the way we do, and try to get better.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like the more you experience in music, the bigger the challenge to focus all that experience into a note.
Yeah.
You know, or whatever it is that you're doing. And you have more practice in doing that, but then you also have more information to work with to arrive at a destination.
Yeah.
You know? So it's I'll never forget when you know, I had a moment of doubt. I might have told you this before, but you know, I became a grandfather in January of 2003. And as you might remember, that's about when Bush and Cheney and Rumsfeld and Condoleezza Rice and all those were gearing up our society for the invasion of Iraq. And for me, I had never told my daughter this until about a week ago, so she didn't even know this. But for me, that moment of becoming a grandfather became this big demarcation in life. And It was and is an incredibly wonderful experience. And what came with it was this sense of responsibility. You know, okay, I'm leader of the family here. I'm also away 6 months a year, playing for strangers, living out of hotels, you know. And so for me, there became this moment of you know, any musician could have told George Bush and Dick Cheney what was going to happen. We all knew what was going to happen to our society and the world and the Iraqi people and the Americans. And for me, what happened was that I began to question my value as a musician. Like, was I doing the most important thing I could do for my family? Basically, that was the question. And I began to get depressed. And I thought, something's not right. This has not happened to me in this way before. It hasn't happened. And so I thought, okay, of all the voices I've heard in my life, who do I hear in this moment of questioning? And the voice I heard was that of Howard Zinn, a great American historian. And a friend of mine knew Howard, and I called him up. This was David Barsamian. And David gave me Howard's phone number. So I called up Howard Zinn, and it's like, what am I going to say to Howard Zinn? You know, I was shaking, I was nervous. And anyway, Rosalind, his wonderful wife, answered the phone, and Kronos, we've been fans for 20 years. Howard will be home in an hour. He's waiting for your call. And so an hour later, I called up Howard Zinn and asked him if it might be possible for me to meet with him. And a month later, I was in his office, and the one question I asked him led to an hour-long discussion. And the question was, what can a normal person do in this time? And Howard proceeded to explain to me what a normal person could do. And in the end, he said, well, musicians aren't normal people, you know. That was after he explained. And one of the things he said was that the powerful people, the George Bushes and Dick Cheneys of the world, are actually afraid of musicians. And I had never thought of that. And as soon as I got that realization from Howard Zinn, I thought, far out.
Yeah.
I'm proud. I can deal with this. And then he talked about the importance of having a community. You can't do anything by yourself. I mean, you can do certain things by yourself, but you can't, kind of create a movement. And then he talked about the importance of using every opportunity you have to be sure that it's very clear where you stand on things and issues.
Is that when you put the sticker on the back of your violin that said, "This machine is a deadly weapon"?
I never did that. I never did that. I think Woody Guthrie did that, didn't he?
Yeah.
This machine kills fascists or something like that.
Right. When in 2001, I was about to embark on a European tour, and we left for the tour on 9/10. And we arrived in Amsterdam on 9/11, and the tour manager picked us up at the airport and said, "What's going on in New York, you guys? There's bombs going off," and I know what the hell he's talking about, and got back to the hotel room in time to watch the Twin Towers collapsing, and our tour was going to start like a day or two later. And so we started the tour, and the first couple of dates were, fine, well attended, but we're still trying to process what's going on. I mean, it was very confusing to see this happening in our hometown from this distance, and it was really hard to get a sense of what was going on, And the keyboard player just wanted to quit, and he was just like, "Look, I've got to go back. I've got to be with my people and stuff." Right. And and as the tour progressed, there were less and less people coming to the shows because World War III was going to break out. That's what it seemed like, And right. We talked about it, and I thought, and sometimes people would say to me, "I can't believe that you didn't talk about what's going on stage." And I'm like, what am I going to say? Whatever I say, it's going to come across as preachy, and But my feeling at that time, and what I said to the keyboard player was, the best thing that we can do is do what we do as best as possible.
Try to do it better.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was, that's all I could bring to the table at that point.
Yeah.
Apart from,
I think Leonard Bernstein said something similarly after the assassination of President Kennedy. And, the dedication that musicians place in their work and their offering to the universe and the notes they play, and that is it.
Yeah,
that definitely is it. And
I say plenty of what I think about in my music anyway.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, for me, it was this kind of intersection of life events, because it's like having grown up, as a teenager during the American War in Vietnam, and seeing that on television, and then seeing it the way it manifests itself in our society, and then of course what was done to the Vietnamese nation and people, and then to think that kind of thing was going to be happening again, in another place, and then all those years had passed, and by that point I was a grandfather, and to feel just as helpless as I did as a 17-year-old when I mean, it was just weird. I think I'll say it. I just lost my nerve for a while. That like, well, what am I really doing? And I guess I would suspect that you question. In fact, I know you do. You question your work all the time. I mean. It's that's how you get better too.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of like
it's a matter of finding that balance where the inner critic isn't totally paralyzing you.
I know. That's exactly it. It's like, you want to say things to yourself that are actually have a little bit of encouragement.
Oh yeah, you've got to, because it's courageous to get out there and do something, and I think that you have to cut performers and artists a lot of slack for that, because
that's the thing. You walk down the street and you never know what's happened to whoever walks by you that day, that year, that decade. You have no idea. And you go into a concert hall and you walk on stage and you have no idea what's happened to anybody out there. I mean, it literally could be just about anything.
Yeah.
And so how do we arrive at something that's valuable? That, for me, that's the whole thing that I'm looking for is, okay, I want to make something that is useful, valuable, that somebody can say, maybe in a moment of incredible despair or a moment of ecstatic happiness or whatever. This is this is wonderful. I want more of this.
Yeah. Oh, this is moving. Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's the kind of music I want to find. And,
Yeah.
and I dedicate every minute of my life to trying to find it. And I'm very thankful to Howard Zinn, though, for convincing me that the George Bushes of the universe are actually afraid of us. That you know, Hitler must have been really afraid.
Right.
Mao and Stalin and all these guys.
Thanks for that vote of
Stalin
confidence.
was a poet and a singer, I think. Yeah. Apparently a good one.
Yeah.
Singer. Yeah. So there we are.
What do you think?
On that note,
We got it?
And that's it for this edition of the Talkhouse Music Podcast. Thanks to our producer-engineer, Elia Einhorn. For more Talkhouse Music podcasts, by all means visit our SoundCloud page or subscribe to our podcasts on iTunes. And to read smart, notable musicians, like David Harrington, writing about new music, please do visit thetalkhouse.com/music.